Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Dream, and you are joining me here for another episode of Psychedelics as Medicine, part of the It's All Good show. Today, my guest is Sharon McKenna. I'll introduce her in a moment. We have gone round and round trying to coordinate this and make this interview happen, this conversation, and I'm so excited that it's finally worked out. A little bit about Sharon. She is a writer, film director, and journalist whose work has appeared in a range of outlets from several alternative weeklies to MSNBC, NBC, Digital, among others. She's written award-winning screenplays, produced innovative digital news programming, and directed both narrative short films and quirky corporate videos. She has a BA in journalism and an MBA in sustainability and studied screenwriting at the UCLA School of Film and Television. She has various projects in development, including documentary and narrative films, fiction books, and a memoir about growing up in the psychedelic soup of the 1970s San Francisco Bay Area. Fascinating. And we'll have a link in the description where you can learn more about her. And also, she has a documentary that is really, I believe, at this point, all consuming for her about Terence McKenna. And she's producing and directing that. And we'll have some other information about that. And just Sharon, welcome to Psychedelics as Medicine. It's so nice to have you here.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. It's great to meet you, and yeah, I'm excited to talk about this and anything else you have on your mind.
So I don't even know where to start. The reason that I found you or you showed up in my world is about the documentary that you're doing about Terrence. And so should we start there, or I'm
Yeah.
super excited to talk to you about psychedelic soup. I love that expression and growing up in San Francisco in the 70s. But where would you like to start?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the film. I think it's getting a fair amount of interest and attention from a whole range of people, which has been really gratifying. It's just for background, it's a project that I started a long, long time ago when Terence McKenna passed away. He passed away in the year 2000. And at the time, I was living in Los Angeles. I just finished at UCLA screenwriting and was down there being a screenwriter and had a couple little babies, twin boys,
Wow.
as a single mom. And Terrence is my first cousin, and Dennis and Terrence are my first cousin. And I knew him a little bit growing up. My father and his father were fairly close, but Terry and I called them Terry and Denny, Terrence and Dennis grew up in Colorado, and we grew up in Northern California. So we didn't see each other a lot through the years, but I'd always been very fascinated by him. There's kind of a big age difference between he and I as well. And obviously when he started becoming, more and more well-known and was writing a lot of his books and doing a lot of his talks, I kind of watched from afar. And then when he passed away, which was really tragic and sad, I just felt like, I'd been wanting to do a project either with him or about him for a long time and had never really figured out what that was going to look like. And so I very spontaneously just decided, because I was in LA and, I could get a crew together very quickly and was just learning to shoot, film, got some people together and we went up to Esalen where there was a memorial for Terrence. This was in, I think, July, like 3 or 4 months after he passed away. And just did some interviews with, Doug Rushkoff and Eric Davis. And there was a bunch of raves around, a bunch of ceremonies and tributes, just kind of a lot of activity. So I didn't really have a plan. I just was like, I want to know what people are thinking and feeling in this moment upon his passing. What are they reflecting on? What are they feeling? Because I knew that there was only going to be one chance to capture that. So that was kind of the origin of the project. And then We also, as part of that kind of long bunch of shoots, we went up to Northern California to Seattle and filmed Tom Robbins, the writer, who sadly passed away. I think last year he died. And he was a good friend of Terrence's, and just an amazing, wonderful, warm person. And so we were able to capture footage of him. So I had all this footage, and then I put it in a box. And I think anybody who's made either a short film or a documentary can relate that sometimes you start something and then life happens. And life happened big time. Raising my kids, writing screenplays. I went back to the world of alternative journalism, and was the editor at the Ventura County Reporter, which was an alternative weekly in Southern California, and did a bunch of environmental investigative journalism, and just kind of went back into the journalism world. And fast forward, raised my kids, got them through college, and in the meantime wrote a book, wrote another screenplay, and just kind of kept thinking in the back of my mind, and following sort of the growth of the psychedelic movement, as well as the attention that Terence was starting to get to some of his ideas from a whole new generation, which I think is something interesting we can talk about. My sister's kids were like, "You mean we're related to Terence McKenna? Oh my God." Like they just, and I'm like, "Really? You know who Terence is?" And they're like, "Oh, all of our friends." And I just thought that was so fascinating because, there's kind of this older generation, there's Dennis's generation and his peers, but there's this younger generation. There's a lot of people in the middle, but so that actually speaks to sort of the universality of Terence's appeal across generations and across demographics. I think not everybody who's into Terence does psychedelics. That's another thing that's, I think, interesting to explore in this film. So I'll stop there, and if you want to ask me any questions, I can go on and tell you where we're at. But
I think it's great that you captured everything at the time of his passing, and then just kind of put it aside, and you didn't have the direction then. You've obviously come up with direction. You're nearing the completion of all of this, so give us an idea of where the documentary is going, or kind of the yeah.
So well, I'm near the completion of filming. So I about 3 or 4 years ago, that now that I finally had some time, my kids were launched, and I was just doing corporate writing, doing some freelance journalism. I decided to get the footage digitized because it wasn't digital back then.
Right.
That's how long so much has changed, right? And so I had it digitized, and it held up really well. It looks really great. And I just thought, well, okay, what's the story now? At that point, 22 years after his passing. Like, what is the lens on the story of Terence McKenna? And the crazy thing was there's lots of lenses. I mean, that's been the most challenging thing about figuring out what to do with the film, is what piece of the story do you tell? What do you focus on? Do you focus on him as a writer, as a storyteller, as a psychedelic guru, as a visionary? I mean, it's like trying to boil the ocean. And so I thought the best way to kind of help me hone the story was to go back and do more interviews, but do them today, in 2023, 24, 25, with people who I had talked to originally, as well as sort of new people carrying the banner or the mantle, of Terence's ideas and works, but doing it in their own way. And through that process, I realized that the angle I'm taking, because this is an independent film, like, let me make this clear, this is not a family sponsored project. Terence McKenna's children are not involved. This is like my take and an independently produced and directed and objective story. And so I wanted to tell it through the eyes of other people reflecting on Terence's legacy, even, some speculation as to what Terence might think about everything that's happening today, along with, background about his, childhood, and sort of, following a linear biographical documentary format, but it's mostly told through the eyes of others. And so that's kind of the approach I took. And I'm just this month actually finishing the last 3 interviews. And it's been all self-funded. This year we did launch crowdfunding to help us finish some shooting. And it's a really bad time for crowdfunding. Everybody's doing their best, like economically, it's kind of tough. So we've been using the crowdfunding to finish the shooting, and then we'll go into editing and post-production probably in another month or so. And that's really the heavy lift. That's where we need to, raise more money to finish the film. But, I'd like to say the hard part's over, because almost over, because the shooting and the interviewing is, it's a lot of research. It's a lot of investment. But the hard part is really the editing and taking my footage, archival footage, all kinds of different, visuals. We're using animation in the film as well, and making a cohesive narrative story. So that's what we're trying to do.
Now, how has it been with the family?
Well, it's funny because, they've known about this project. The kids were both pretty young when I started it, and they, I think they're doing their own thing. That's kind of really all I can say. Like they are getting to the point now where they are getting serious about archiving Terence McKenna's work. Because, it's hard. It's all over the place. It's kind of like everybody owns a piece of Terence, and it's a double-edged sword, because all of the YouTube videos and all of his talks that are so easily accessible are what have made him so well known and so widely distributed and so influential. And so it's kind of like the horse is out of the barn on that. And I think, back then, I don't think people really were like, oh, we need to, protect this talk and put it behind a paywall. I also don't think that's what we should be doing. I think, his ideas are for everyone. But I think they're kind of wrangling, his estate and what to do in terms of films that they want to produce. So I think they're doing their own thing.
So, I know you were on Dennis's show recently. I take it that you have his full support.
Yeah, he's been great. He was there from the very beginning in the year 2000 when I said I want to do this. He was very supportive and introduced me to people to film. And since then, he and I have become very close. He's like a brother to me. And yeah, I did a really interesting extended 2-day interview with him in Palenque, Colorado, where him and Terence grew up, which was really, really great. And yeah, so he's super, super supportive. I think Dennis has been very supportive of all kinds of projects about Terence, and through the Academy. I don't know if people are familiar with the McKenna Academy. There's so many great podcasts up there. Like, he has really built up a library of knowledge around plant medicine, psychedelics, and he's done a lot of tributes and interviews with people about Terence and his legacy. So I encourage people to go there and look around and see what's there, because Dennis he's been really awesome.
Now, I guess you brought up some aspects of what you have found interesting in this whole process. And so I guess that's a direction I'd like to go here is, what are some of the surprises? Anything caught you off guard? And then how is it all different, 25 years later than it was?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest surprise for me has been there's been some consistent themes that have come up in every interview, kind of without coaxing, without leading the witness. And that has been this idea of prescient, of being so prescient. And Terence sort of, many years ago, before he died, starting to articulate, what he himself called, I think, weird ideas or funny ideas about the future and about technology and about the role of machines and humans and how they interact. And, you know, he was just spot on about so much of this stuff. And so I think today a lot of people are just like, you know, and even just like reading the comments on some of these YouTube channels, it's like, it's amazing how right he was about so much stuff. And so that I think that's a big focus kind of the film, is like, you know, contextually showing like the things that he said and he predicted. And he wasn't right about everything, obviously. And I think the other consistent theme has been sort of people being ambivalent about, you know, the time wave and how much Terence invested in the time wave and that whole, you know, idea. And I think most of that was happening in the 90s. And then he was just very focused on time and the end of time. It's very interesting. And how that sort of informed his thinking towards the end of his life was another kind of consistent theme. So I think, you know, for me, so to avoid not going crazy with all of the different directions that this could go, and trying to stuff everything into one, you know, feature documentary. I mean, this is just a feature documentary. Those are about an hour and a half long, you know, and it'll probably go into festivals and maybe streaming, I don't know. But you have to focus on a through line that people can grasp. And so I decided I'm not trying to really preach to the converted necessarily, you know, people who are deeply, deeply schooled in Terence, deep into psychedelics, and super, super knowledgeable about DMT and all of that. They will find this interesting, but that's kind of not my audience. My audience is more, what I hope my audience will be, sort of mid to entry level Terence fans. So people who have either just, you know, been exposed to him a little bit and found his ideas really interesting and have kind of wondered, well, who is this guy? You know, where did he come from? What's his background? What were his influences? And why does he matter? So those are kind of the questions that I'm trying to answer through the film. I'm not trying to answer every deep philosophical question or idea that he put forth, because that's just not even possible.
Now, from my own experience, Terence had a tremendous impact on the trajectory of my life, and I met him in person.
You did? Oh, great.
In Palenque in 1994.
Oh, you were in Palenque. Oh my God.
And it was an amazing time for all of us in the psychedelic world, as we were, well, for me, exploring, and then to have contact with Terence and Ralph Metzner and Jonathan Ott and so many others at this conference. My story has been put out there a little bit about my interaction with Terence. I was guided after a DMT experience. I was doing at this conference DMT circles where we would there would be 10 of us, and we would there were 5 DMT joints, and we would pass them around. And the last one that I was doing at that conference, and Christian Ratch was there, and he turned into Buddha, and it was just all this crazy stuff for me. And I was also on a little bit of LSD that night. But then the others in the DMT place, I call them the others, said, "We need you to go and give a message to Terence." And I said, "No, don't have me do this. You know, I'm on acid. I just finished a DMT circle. This is not. I don't know." But I've learned that you can't, when I've been guided by them to do something, and this is just my experience, you can't say no. They don't let up. And so I went and woke him at his cabana, and he so graciously invited me in, and we had a discussion, and I was, as anyone who knows me can imagine, I was bouncing off the walls. Months later, we all met up with him at a speaking engagement he had in Virginia. So a number of us that were at Palenque, I was living in Arizona, I guess at the time, and so we traveled to Virginia to see him and meet up with everyone. And he took one of the people aside and he said, is Mark still climbing the walls or bouncing off the ceiling or something like that? And so I often claim that my psychedelic claim to fame is that Terence McKenna thought I was crazy. So,
high bar.
But it was he was he influenced me in such a huge way. Mm-hmm. And so I'm super excited that there's not a lot out there. I know that there's several projects all around that are in the works, and people really wanting to help solidify his legacy in such positive way. I'm super excited about your project, and we'll keep everyone informed on it, and we'll give links in the description so people can donate and really help this come to fruition.
And we have a newsletter too. I try to get it out like every 3 weeks, but it ends up being like every month, that you can subscribe to. So the title of the film is "It's Going to Get Weirder." Is one of his most famous quotes. It's going to get weirder.com. If you go there, you can sign up for a newsletter. And that's where I kind of keep people up to date on what we're doing, what the interviews are like, what are we doing in animation. It's just kind of a fun behind the scenes look at the film. And on that site, you can also donate there, or you can go to the crowdfunding site. It links to the crowdfunding site. But thank you. I'm excited as well. I think, I talked about this a little bit on Dennis's podcast, but documentary filmmaking is not as easy as it used to be. I don't think it's ever been super easy, but definitely there wasn't, there's a saturation of documentaries, which I actually think is good. I think because there's a lot of really great work going on. There's so many good documentaries today. At the same time, you're all chasing the same kind of pool of grants and investors and producing funds, and that pie is getting smaller and smaller and smaller as grants dry up. And so it's very challenging, and costs are expensive. So it's like, we've been really focusing on making this a kind of a people powered project. We are crowdfunding from the grassroots, and so it's been really gratifying when people donate. They often make a comment like, why am I donating to this? And just the love of Terence, or just like a lot of people, a couple of people are like, oh, I was at Palenque, I'll never forget it. And, one guy donated and he said, my Terence's influence on me was one of the reasons I named my daughter McKenna, just like, there's this whole and so it's kind of a nonprofit project, right? That's just going by donation. And so, we're doing our best to finish it, because I do think now more than ever, like, it's so important to have people be exposed to him, his ideas, and sort of learn more about who he was as a human being, which is also an objective of the film. So I'm very excited, and I appreciate your support.
Absolutely. And we will be following you and keeping in touch on all of this. Now, let's back up a little bit. And I love the expression psychedelic soup, and you growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 70s. Give us a little bit of that and that feeling and what that expression means to you.
Yeah, well, I'm lucky to be alive. Let's put it that way. I've been reflecting on this more, funnily enough, as I've been working on this film, because my experience in my youth of psychedelics and drugs generally was different from Terence and Dennis. Came at it from a very different place. Like, if you've read Dennis's memoir or Graham St. John's biography about Terence, which I recommend, it's very good. They approached it from a standpoint of curiosity and intellectualism. They were about like, what does it mean? Whereas, and I think that just came from their intellect. Whereas the way I grew up, which was, I'm the youngest of 8 kids, and we moved to Northern California in 1965. So I was just a tiny little thing. But between 65 and, 79, it was just anything goes, I mean, every weekend we were in the Haight. We just, I lived in the suburbs, but it's like we were always in the city. And my teachers were dropping acid with us. I mean, it was just a complete free for all. And a lot of it was about just wanting to escape the suburbs and the fucked up stuff that was happening at home, frankly. I mean, this was the 70s. I mean, and it's like I had older siblings who were going through a lot of challenges, but they also were like, hey, you want to go to a concert at the Fillmore? Like, I'm like 13, like, here, try this. Here's some acid. Like my first acid trip, I was 13. And that's not really like, I don't recommend this route. I again, I'm lucky I survived it, but there were, we also didn't just do like hallucinogenics, right? It was like, oh, let's smoke some PCP or let's take some Quaalude. Literally, like whatever is on the menu today, that's what we would put in our mouths. And so it was a tumultuous time. Saw a lot of great music, but I don't really remember a lot of it. And it was hard on my parents. They just were like, what is happening? Like between the drugs and the civil rights movement and the women's movement and family members in and out of jail, and it was just very chaotic. So I've thought for a long time about writing a memoir about that time. I also had a very unique experience in that I had 6 older brothers, and my dad, like Terence's dad, was very into hunting and fishing in the outdoors. Like we were raised to just, camping was vacation. Backpacking into the middle of nowhere was where we went on vacation. And but one of them was a taxidermist. So I grew up with this very weird dichotomy of like, he had a taxidermy sort of shop set up in our garage, and I was a little girl, and I'd go in there and there'd just be all these like, dead birds and guts and stuff. But they also rescued animals. So in our backyard, we had owls and hawks, and then we got a pet raccoon from a baby, and we raised this pet raccoon. I mean, we were like the weird McKenna's, right? And like the game warden was always at our house, and eventually they took the raccoon away. And so there was just this weird slice of time in America, but specifically in Northern California, where drugs meant met suburban development, met open space schools. Like I went to California High, which was the first school where they didn't have walls between the classrooms. And, a lot of the teachers were, just out of Vietnam. I mean, it was just this time. That's kind of the soup I'm talking about. It wasn't just psychedelic. It was a cultural soup. So yeah, I'm trying to write that memoir, but it's hard to think about some of that stuff.
Right. Sounds like it was a lot. And that'll be an interesting project to pull together. And it's one of those things where we go back through what our life is about based on, from the perspective of who we've become or who we're still in the process of becoming. And that's always fascinating for any of us, but it sounds particularly in your case. What's life like for you now? I mean, I know that you're working on this and it's all consuming and everything. You're living in Europe. The world is an interesting place for, lack of a better description. Where are you at with it? How is your life?
It's not settled, and sometimes I wonder if it ever will be. I've probably moved, I don't know, 18, 20 times in the last, 10 or 15 years. And that's due to a lot of things. I think being a single mom has been really, really hard as the sole provider. And, you're working, you have a good job, we're living in Seattle, boom, like 2008 crash comes, you're laid off, you don't have any money, you're living with friends, I mean, it's just, again, for my generation, I think it's been kind of a shitty timeline, let's put it that way, right? There's been like booms and busts, but the busts you never really crawl back from. But having said that, you know, I've done some really interesting things. Like I moved off grid in Northern California, outside of Nevada City. I don't know if you know where that is, but very cool town. And that was during COVID, you know, and I like hauled my water from a spring, and I used solar power. I lived in a trailer, you know, on 5 acres, and just kind of hid from the world for a while and did a lot of thinking and meditating about my past and what I wanted my future to look like. And you know, COVID, as you know, just screwed everything up. It screwed people up. You couldn't build a house anywhere. Everything was so expensive. And I just thought, you know, the Trump thing happened, and then everybody said, you know, he's not going to win again. And I said, you want to bet? Like I was the only one who was saying he's going to win again, and they're like, no, you're crazy. How could that ever happen? And I think I'm kind of like Terence in that way. My mom used to say, you have ESP, you know, you see the future. And unfortunately I was right about that. And so I got out. I went to Portugal on a visa, lived in Portugal for a year and a half, and then moved to France on a visa. And so now me and my son are just kind of like visa recycling, like, you know, trying to be able to stay in Europe, which people might find this interesting. It's getting a lot harder, like for Americans to come over. Like when you do your journey, it'll be on a 90-day visa. But if you want to stay in Europe, you know, they don't really want Americans. And gee, I wonder why. But they have their own things they have to deal with. And so it's very kind of like not really sure where I'll end up. But I also just couldn't, like a lot of people, I couldn't afford to stay in the United States. It's so expensive there. I went back to film Dennis McKenna, and I went to Colorado, and I hadn't been back to the United States in almost 2 years. And I went to, you know, I think I went to a Whole Foods or something, and my jaw just dropped. I was just like, how are you people living? I literally am like, how are you living? Because things are just significantly cheaper here. Rent's cheaper, healthcare is cheaper, food's cheaper. Um, and it's safer, and the people are pretty wonderful, you know. I've met some really amazing people, and they've been very welcoming. So I'm just trying to like stay stable to finish the film, you know, and then I actually have another couple other projects in the works. I'm working on a early development of a documentary about I'm very into my Irish heritage. One of the best screenplays I wrote was about the Irish famine. And so I'm trying to put together a documentary about archaeologists who study genocide. So, you know, the Irish famine was a genocide. It wasn't a famine. It was forced starvation. And I went on an archaeological dig in Ireland at a famine site. And I just thought, wow, this is just really fascinating. And the archaeologists who do this kind of work get very emotional and very emotionally connected to their work. And so I'm thinking about doing a short film kind of just about archaeologists who specialize in this. You know, and with Gaza and everything, it'll be interesting to see if, you know, they're able to do any archaeology recovery there. I don't know. So you know, I'm just plugging away, and I'm happy to say my sons are doing great. And my son Declan McKenna is the animator for the documentary about Terence, and he's amazing. He just graduated from Barcelona, BAU in Barcelona, with his master's in stop motion animation, and worked at Leica Studios in Portland. And so he's my partner in crime on this crazy journey of this film. And you know, we're using animation in a way to, I mean, you know, talking heads only go so far, right? And it's like, and footage of Terence, I can only use so much of it because I'm making this as an independent, fair use produced film. And I also think that people are just very visual today. Like they just, you know, they like visual metaphors. And so we're incorporating paper cut stop motion and other types of stop motion animation strategically into the storyline, and that's a very painstaking, time-consuming process that we're doing. But I think it'll make the film even more unique. So So tell me about you though. I want to know about your about your journey because you said, Terrence had a big impact on you. And I'd like to know like when did you first discover him and what was your trajectory there?
So it was early 90s, and it coincided with my traversing the psychedelic realms. So his books and information, and then seeing him a couple of times speak, and it just I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and we moved to Laguna Beach, California, when I was the beginning of my sophomore year in high school.
Oh wow,
So a
that's a
very
change.
kind of interesting time to move. And prior to that, I had gone to a private school in Omaha from literally pre-kindergarten till the end of my freshman year. So I was, 3 years off of being a lifer with people I had gone to school with forever. And all of a sudden, my parents getting divorced. My mom just wants out of that whole energetic of where life had changed so radically for her. And she came to me and she said, I want to know, do you want, should we move to Laguna Beach? And after a little bit, I said no. And she said, we're going. It's not like I'm suggesting Ohio. We're going. It's Laguna Beach. And I was like, well, great. Good question. Even though, you could have approached it a little different. And I got there and it was very cliquey. It was a lot of these kids. I mean, we call Laguna Beach like behind the orange curtain, in Orange County, California. And a lot of these kids had gone to school together for years and years. And here I am, not even like some cool California kid or whatever. I'm like from Omaha, and I had traveled around the world. My dad was big on travel and those types of things. So it wasn't like I was, a farm boy, but I definitely wasn't, Southern California. And so when I got there, school hadn't started yet. It was this summer. And I was hanging out every day at Main Beach, right there in the heart of Laguna. And I started hanging out with the people that lived at Main Beach, the transients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they lived on the beach or wherever they could. And I started to get to know an aspect of society that I had not been exposed to prior to that. And I found everyone so fascinating, and their stories and how they were living and what was important to them. And I was introduced to, I had already been smoking marijuana by the time I got there, but then I was introduced to mushrooms. And then I did make some, high school started, I made some friends, and I took my first acid trip. In Laguna Beach, we had taken it, and it was late at night, and we all fell asleep. And I woke up in a friend's apartment and was like tripping. And I was like, oh, wow. And everyone else was out. And I was like, I'm just going to cruise around Laguna at like 2, 3, 4 in the morning. And it was an incredible experience. And I was just like, wow, this is really cool. And so that was like the beginning for me. And then I moved to New York City in the mid 90s. So it was probably 93 if I met Terence in 94. And
I was in New York then. I was there. That's when I was working at MSNBC. But yeah.
It was a great time. I mean,
it really was. It really,
I have no desire to go back and live in New York, but that time that I had there was incredible. Wetlands, and I used to go out with, I didn't have a lot of money. So I would go out with, I would say like 2 subway tokens, $10 and my one hitter. And I could have the most incredible evening ever on a major budget, and just have all these great experiences. Spent a lot of time at Wetlands, sing bands. Ended up managing a band in New York and just worked for a film studio out in Long Island City, and just it was a fascinating time, but I had always wanted, we had wanted DMT. And so my friends that I had made in New York, it was like, does anyone have DMT? And everyone's like, no, we don't know where to get it. This is 1993. And I got a call one night, and a friend of mine said, you know what we've been looking for? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, I've got it. Come down to the Lower East Side. And
had you done DMT before this?
No, not at all.
You wanted it. Okay, yeah.
I had read about it. I had learned about it. I was like, okay, I want to have this experience. Yeah. And we went down I met them down in Alphabet City. At that time, it was a very interesting area of New York City, and we're walking to someone's apartment, and there's rats, and it was like really, it was, again, a fascinating time for me. And we got to this apartment that was, I'm in my truck camper now, and it feels like it was about the size of this truck camper. It was so small. And they're like, here, we have this DMT, and they loaded it up, and they said, who wants to go first? And they all looked at me, and I'm like, well, okay. I had no idea. And I had this really, I had a very powerful experience. Yeah. And once everyone had done it, I said, let's go back to the guy, and I'll buy whatever he's got left. I'm tired of looking for it. I want to experiment with it. Yeah. And I went back, bought all that he had, and experiment I did. It's like, I wonder what it's like when I first wake up in the morning. And then, I wonder what it's like. I've just got off the subway, and I've been surrounded by all these energies. I wonder what it's like now. And I'm back from a club at 4 a.m. and had been doing lines and whatever else. I'm like, I wonder what it's like now. And that particular evening at 4 a.m, I went full on. And every time I realized that it was the DMT in this little glass pipe that got me where I was, I was spilling it on the floor. I was just like, oh my God, I've got to go back. And it was a wild experience, and I wanted to stay there. And the others said, you can't stay here. That's not the way it works. And I said, oh, sorry, but you've shown me too much. I know I can stay here. And I called my brother in London. And I said, David, you and I we have done psychedelics together over the years, 2.5 years older than me. He wasn't there. And I left a message on his machine. I said, David, you and I have been searching our whole lives. I've found it. I have found what we've been searching for. And I was way out there. And I said, you're not answering the phone. You may be there. And so I said, here's what's going to happen. I said, I'm going to stay there. It's going to look like I OD'd. It's not going to be a pretty scene, but I need you to know everything is perfectly fine. Okay. So I just need you to know that whatever happens. He called me a half hour later, and I answered the phone. And again, I'm just like way out there. And he said, are you okay? I said, I'm fine. He said, what's going on? And I told him, and he said, do you have more? And I said, oh yes, I have more. And he said, fly to London, go to the airport right now, get on the next flight, come to London, because that's where he was living. And I said, oh, dude, I'm sounds great, but no, it doesn't sound great at all. I don't think I can handle any of that, Yeah. And he said, do you have a place that you can go? And I said, I can call my friend that we got this together. And so I did. I went over and saw him. Well, this was back in the 90s. There was no digital voice messaging. So it was a micro cassette. Mm-hmm. This wild message that I left for him. So he called his friends in London, and he said, my brother's had this kind of crazy experience, and do we have some resources that we can help him? And one of his friends said, Terence McKenna, I know him, and he happens to be in London right now. And he said, bring me the micro cassette, and I'll get it to Terence. And so this recording of me just going way off was delivered to Terence, and months later, like 2 months later, I got an email from him saying, "Hey, dude, what's up?" And that was it. And I didn't really follow up on that at the time, because I was just like, oh my God, he has the recording. I mean, I'm just not quite the pretense that I wanted to meet Terence with. I'm not sure but what happened was my brother's friends in London said, we know an urban shaman in New York City. His name is Charles Lawrence. And let's put your brother in touch with him. And I contacted Charles right away. He invited me over to his place. I went and met him. Very distinguished older gentleman, just the look of almost like a wizard. And I went and talked to him, and he was fascinated with the story. And he said, "Do you have more?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Come back tonight. I want you to have an experience in front of me. I want to hold space for you while you have an experience, so I can read the energy, see what's going on." And I went back, had the experience, and it's a breakthrough, deep experience. Whoa. And he said that he takes people to Peru to do ayahuasca, which I had heard about. And he said, I have a trip coming up. It was October of 94. And he said, "I'd like you to go." And I said, "Absolutely." And it happened to correspond. I was born in October of 64, so it corresponded with my 30th birthday. And so in just a wild series of events, I was at a Yankee Stadium to see Pink Floyd, and I had a pipe that had some DMT residue, and I hit it. And the others are saying to me, "You see that guy sitting in front of you?" And I'm like, "Yes." And they're like, "Talk to him." And I'm like, "Oh, come on, like Pink Floyd. I'm just, I'm here for recreational evening." They're like, "Talk to him." And for 20, 30 minutes, the others kept telling me to talk to him. And I was just like, I know. And then I'm like, okay, what do I say? And they said, "Tell him he's on the right path." So I tapped this guy on the shoulder. He's got long hair. He turns around, his eyes, he's got big eyes. The whole thing. And I said, "Hey, listen, I don't know what medicine you're on tonight, but I smoked some DMT, and the others want me to tell you that you're on the right path." And he looked at me and he said, "Cool, thank you." And that was it. And I thought, okay, I did what I was supposed to do. I'm done. That was great. And toward the end of the show, they said, "Smoke DMT with him." And I'm there at the show with actually two of my brother's friends. He's in London. I'm at the show with a couple of his friends, and I'm like, "Smoke DMT with this guy?" And so I tap him on the shoulder, and I'm like, "Listen, the others want me to offer to smoke some DMT with you. I mean, do you have any interest?" And he's like, "Yeah, absolutely." And I'm like, "Okay, you want to come back to my place?" And at the time I was living in my father's 5-story townhouse on the Upper East Side, and I'm like, okay, I just meet this guy who's, long-haired hippie, and I'm going to take him to this, I'm just like, wow, life is crazy. But
yeah.
Long story short, he and I became great friends, and he went to Peru with me. And the trip became 2 weeks in the jungle doing ayahuasca, a total solar eclipse outside of Arica, Chile, and then the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. We were gone for a month, and it was my Saturn returns, turning 30, most amazing experience ever on all the different levels. And we so that sort of laid the groundwork, and then it was shortly after that that I did the ethnobotany conference, and that story is on dmtchronicles.com website that I have, meeting Terence and some materials from that conference and everything, and my life has just been fascinating ever since then. I was right years ago. I was starting to write a book about my life, and I thought, well, there needs to be a chapter about my mentors, or my person that was helping me write said, let's talk about your mentors. And I'm like, well, there's my grandfather and my father, but really my greatest mentors have been psychedelics, and DMT has played a huge role. So since 1993, I have always had access to DMT, and sometimes it's been several times a week. Other times I'll go 2-3 years without doing it. Now it's weekly, sort of just checking in and everything. And it's been incredible. And my life has unfolded in the most beautiful ways. And to me, psychedelics have played a huge part in that. As you see, the psychedelics as medicine, I take it, early on, it was like, oh yeah, let's just take all this. And then it became, very, in a serious ritual and with focused intention and everything else. And so that's why I started the podcast. And I had Danny Goler on, who is absolutely fascinating. I had told him about you, and he said, please make the introduction.
Did you try it with DMT with the laser or no?
So I got the lasers. Danny, got me all set up with everything. And I called him. I said, I've got it all. And what do I need to know? And he told me everything. And he said, call me as soon as you do it. Just call me. Let's talk about it then. And so I'm traveling with it right now. Okay. And we have done, we did a little DMT here on Lake Powell a couple of days ago, and just sat and looked at the lake and everything else. And I thought, oh, we should do the laser thing. I haven't done it yet. One of the things for me is
to your audience.
Oh no, I'm super excited about it. One of the things for me is that when I do DMT, I go deep. It's kind of like there's most of the time it's very easy, all the time it's very easy for me to break through. And they say, oh, we've been waiting for you. And I'm like, great, let's get down to business. And so, Danny has said to me, he said, if you forget that you have the laser, don't worry about it. Just go with whatever's going on. And so it just hasn't felt like quite the right time. But it is, I've got the whole setup and everything. I've got it here with me. And so it's like, all right, well, when the time's right, it'll happen.
I think they're making a film, right? They're making a documentary about that.
Yeah, they're making a documentary about that. He is incredibly interested in Terence and was really excited when I connected the two of you. And
he's great.
It's this community it continues to impress me. And what I love more than anything now is, if you had told me that I would have a website called the DMT Chronicles and a podcast called the DMT Chronicles and a podcast called Psychedelics as Medicine, like 5 years ago, even, I would have said, oh, yeah, right. We're going to put a big black dot over my face or something like that and change my voice. What are you talking about? And so I love and maybe it's just my age and everything else. Like, I don't give a fuck what people think about me. I'm not looking for anyone's validation. I spent a lot of years not talking about my psychedelic use because I didn't want to be like, oh, he's that drugged out hippie guy.
Same here. I mean, I've only been talking about it just as I've talked, because again, my experience was different, but I had a lot of shame around it, which is interesting. And so I feel like now that we're in I hate this term, but the psychedelic renaissance, it's like, I feel like everybody has permission to talk about their path and their experience, and listening to you tell the whole story about like how hard it was to like get DMT and like, bring it to others and all of that reminds me of, talking to Dennis about, bringing back mushrooms, thank God they did that. But people don't realize that you couldn't really get psilocybin mushrooms. Like when I was in high school, it was like really, they just were not, they weren't everywhere. Now it's just like, you can just like get them delivered,
Right.
and that's in a pretty short, expansive time. And back then you had to be super, super careful. And, I had friends who went to jail and now and that's another thing that I just wish Terence was here to see and comment on that trajectory, because there's obviously positives, and the commercialization aspect of it is troubling to some, including myself. Actually, I'm curious what you think about that. Like, just big pharma and getting in on the game.
It concerns me. I mean, everything. There's an aspect of just about anything in reality. If you look at it one way, it's very concerning. If you look at it another way, it's I mean, I say if they didn't call me Dr. Dream, they'd call me the spin doctor. And so it's not that I look at things through rose-colored glasses, but everything happens for a reason. I do follow, what's going on, and with big pharma and looking into all the different psychedelic compounds and everything. And yeah, there are concerns. It's never been easier to get. I mean, we did the Oregon Eclipse Festival, 2017 or 18. And 60,000 people, and we're all watching the eclipse. And of course, we're vaping a little bit of DMT. I have never smelled so much DMT in my life, all around.
Yeah, interesting.
We went and saw Tipper, the DJ, at the Gorge, and it was part of his one of his last 6 shows. We then saw his last 2 shows that he's ever going to do, apparently, in Red Rocks. But there was a sign at security when you walked into the Gorge that said "No DMT allowed." And I was like,
specific sign that said no.
I was like, wow, things have really changed. It used to be like people would give you. Yeah, I know. And so it's going to go where it needs to go. I think that I have stories. The DMT Chronicles was to really set up to chronicle people's stories, just regular people. And from never drinking again, to getting off meth, to like all these different stories of how the medicine really works. And I think DMT is not particularly one that is easy to misuse. Anything can be misused, but DMT, I think, is a little different. It seems to have its own consciousness and everything around it. And so people are able to get it. I've got friends that I don't deal with like the dark web that much, or wherever people are getting things online. I'm fortunate. I've got friends that I trust that are making it themselves, doing the extracts and everything like that. But what I'm hearing is, everything's available, like everything. And I'm just like, that is just, wild. And then there was I can't remember his name, the gentleman, he worked for Apple. He developed some of their, like, very famous developer for Apple. But toward the end of his life, he really got into, I think they're called light wands, these 5-MeO DMT vape pens. And that his thing was he wanted to get them out into the world, and that it was his wish I remembered his name right now. I didn't know we were going there in this talk, but that one of his greatest accomplishments was helping people get access to that. After all the work he did for Apple, and he developed like some famous software that Apple had or something like that. But, obviously that's where his money came from. But he was like, my one of my legacies, my most important legacy may be getting this 5-MeO out to people. And so wow. I think it's important, and I'm just a small voice in all of that. But I did a Facebook page for DMT Chronicles, and I started going through my friends list. And I've got almost 5,000 friends on Facebook or whatever, and I started going through and hand selecting who I was going to invite. And then I was like, yeah, fuck it, and I invited everybody. And my wife Stephanie said, because this is like people that book us on tour and this, that, and the other thing, and Unity churches and all this. She said, you did what? And I said, yeah, I don't really care anymore. If they're going to have a problem with me, best that they figure it out right now and walk away, right. And the people that join this group, I'm shocked. It's not the most psychedelic people I know at all. It's some of some very mainstream people I know. Well, they're going to watch this now and say, "You really consider us that mainstream?" But the ones that are liking things are like, it's really surprising to me. And so I've always kind of said that it's really important that we live our truth and we put ourselves out there, because first of all, it's a much cleaner way to live. Second of all, you never know who's going to see you living your truth, and it gives them permission for them to live their truth. And that's
giving permission.
That's huge.
Was a big Terence thing. I mean, that came up in a lot of the interviews as well. I mean, he gave people permission to not only to do psychedelics, but to think differently and to think for themselves, and to challenge authority. And it's just so fascinating, because, you're saying like everything's everywhere, and it's kind of like everything was everywhere in the 60s and 70s. And then we had just this, the 80s and the 90s, the early 90s, the whole like war on drugs thing obviously failed. But there was just this kind of desert, of like demonization and prosecution of drugs. And, during that time, Terence was very out on a limb, outspoken, out there kind of putting himself at risk, when everybody else is like, just say no, just say no. So I think that's kind of an interesting sort of piece of the timeline as well. And now we're, people are coming out. And I think also with everything so screwed up and people are feeling very weird. They're feeling like something really weird is going to happen. A lot of weird stuff has happened. A lot of them are saying, fuck it, I don't care. It's like, I can't get a job. I can't keep a job. I've been living this kind of fake life, and so I'm here for it. I think it's great. And, but yeah, I think you should write a memoir.
One of the things,
great stories.
And maybe I tend to be more of a talker than a writer, but who knows? One of the things that interested me that I'll share here at that 94 ethnobotany conference in Palenque was the level of paranoia that Jonathan Ott particularly, but he had been attacked by the government and, all of this, but all of them. And here I am, I'm traveling with everything, absolutely everything. But I'm, I've got this thing, call me whatever you want to call me, but I'm traveling in the light. I don't sell it. This is the medicines. I always consider myself kind of like Cocapelli, and I've got all the medicines in my humpback. But the level of paranoia was fascinating. And then Terence also said, because I was doing these DMT joint circles where I had put, a couple hundred people through this experience in a very easy way of doing DMT, sprinkling it in a joint and everything like that. And he said, that's nuts. It makes no sense that you're doing that. and I'm sitting there and I'm tripping, and I'm on the one bed and he's sitting on his bed. And I said, Terence, that's interesting because you're telling people to put this powder in a glass pipe and vaporize it. For some of us, that has a very uncomfortable, other memories to it.
Yeah.
And I said, what's interesting to me is, rhetorical, but, who told you that that's the way to do it? Because I feel like the others have guided me to be, doing these DMT joint circles. But I was definitely a bit of an anomaly at that conference. People, if they were traveling with anything, they kept it really on the down low. And I'm just like, no, here's what I'm doing. We're meeting in my cabana tonight. It's just 10 people. Let's see who wants to be there. And doing this, but it did kind of have a completely different energetic. But at that time I was 30. I don't know how old Terence would have been in 1994.
In his late 40s, I think, maybe.
Right. So, it was, I'd come around all of it differently and, right. Not so public in the beginning. And then, my foundation has always been sort of that, I don't want to say new age because that doesn't do it justice at all, but like a spiritual metaphysical, sort of way. I mean, I was traveling through Mexico and they took me aside and they took my DMT out.
Oh, wow.
Of my bag. They found it and said, what is this? And I said, oh, when I get mosquito bites, because if you smell it, it's like very pungent. I'm like, when I get mosquito bites, that's what I put on the mosquito bites to heal them.
And it worked.
It did work. And I also had a pound of weed and mushrooms and all sorts of other stuff in that same bag. But, most people wouldn't have taken the chance. I certainly wouldn't do that today.
No, I mean, it was, I used to travel with drugs you didn't really even, there was no question that you wouldn't bring the drugs.
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah. For me, it was like, all right, I'm going to be at Teotihuacan, of course, Yeah. I mean, it's just kind of goes with the territory. The medicines, people travel with their prescriptions. I'm just traveling with my medicines. It's just a different prescribed by a different energetic than everyone else.
Wow.
This has been fascinating. I so appreciate the time with you.
I didn't know that much about you, but now I'm going to go to your Facebook page.
Awesome. Please.
And follow it.
So I like to ask toward the end of the conversation where we're at about right now, like, what would you like to leave us with? And it doesn't have to be about the documentary. I had other questions that I was going to ask you about, like, single mother of twins, what was most important to instill in your children, for their future and all this. And you took me off track by asking me a question, which then I'm like, blah, 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 blah. But I would like to give you a moment just to share whatever it is you're called to share right now with us.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think like a lot of people, I'm feeling very up and down, like super, super big highs and optimism that, as Terence said, there's going to be a transformation of some kind. And, he also said that might not be a good one. It could be a good one. We just don't know. And so I try to be really optimistic that we have to go through hell to get to this better place. And then there's days where I'm just like, I don't really want to get out of bed. And so I think at this time, the most important thing, at least for me, and I know for my boys and my friends, is really striving to keep empathy alive. I think, societally, there's an empathy deficit. It's been going on for a while. But it's really the only thing that's going to kind of keep us together through this is empathy and support and love for each other. And I'm trying to practice that while staying sane at the same time. And, and it's a lonely road, like doing this project, when you're kind of just you're plugging away. You don't, you don't have somebody right there saying, keep going. And like, you're doing a great job. You're just sort of in this little silo. And I just have to remember that tenacity is like my middle name, and like I'm not going to stop and I'm not going to give up. And I'm very, very grateful for the people who have donated, but also for just the amazing connections. Like you were talking earlier about the community and the connections. There is just this web. Like this woman donated and emailed me and the other day, a wonderful woman. She said, I don't know if you remember me, but when Terence passed away, I came and I stayed at your house in Venice Beach and you drove me everywhere and you had these two little babies. And I'm like, I don't even remember you, but thank you for reconnecting with me. And now she's like, and I'm putting the word out about the documentary and I'm reaching out to all these people. And I was just like, man, life is so weird, right? Like, and this is Terence fostered, not just Terence, Dennis and others, the others fostered this sort of ecosystem that just keeps connecting people. And, let's just keep connecting and sticking together and helping each other. So that was a ramble, but it's late here. Not late. It's like 6 o'clock or something, but it's been a long week.
No, I love it. Something I want you to know. I honor our connection, and I want you to know that I'm solid on Team Sharon, and all that means. I'm also. Oh, it's right. We're right there. I'm the It's All Good guy. And so if you ever feel like there's no one there and whatever, you reach out to me. And if there's any way at all that we can connect on this European adventure that Stephanie and I are going on, you will keep in touch. It would be awesome if you're in Spain, or if we can even on our way to Paris, just stop, or we can meet up in Paris, whatever it is. I would love to meat you in person.
Yeah, no, I would love that as well. I'm really excited, and you're doing a lot of really good work. And you found your thing. I mean,
it found me.
It found you, and that's a blessing. So it's just been great, and yeah, we will keep in touch. And if people do go to the website and they see the newsletter, at the bottom also is my email address. And so people, if they want to send words of encouragement or ask questions or connect with me, please do email me. I love hearing from people. So.
Well, this has been exceptional, and another wonderful connection for me with you that has been brought on by Terence. So he continues to do good work beyond. Sharon, thank you so much. And we'll be in touch, and anything that I can do, I'll be doing over here for you, and hope to meet you soon in person.
Okay, thank you. And safe travels in the van. Have fun.
Woo!